Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Paramita and I welcome you to my channel Paramita PM. If you are new to my channel, I would request you to watch my videos, go through the content, and if you really find them helpful, then do like my channel, share it, and please subscribe to my channel. And now, without any further delay, I'll get into the lecture. In this video, I'll look at the concept of colonialism. I will look at the different aspects of colonialism, its positive and negative effects, and at the same time, I'll explain what function does post-colonialism have. In fact, how does post-colonial theory or post-colonial criticism help us, in analyzing any kind of discourse, be it literary discourse, cultural discourse, or religious discourse. Let us have a look at the concept of colonialism. So, what is colonialism? To put it in very simple words, we can say that colonialism is the dominance of one powerful country over another country. Colonialism involves the territorial expansion of one country beyond its borders, and it makes the colonizer claim its authority or sovereignty over another country. And colonialism takes place, or the colonization of a country takes place when military strength or power is employed. Therefore, imperialism comes here, and that tells us that imperialism is indispensable, to the occurrence of colonialism, because colonialism or colonization of a country takes place with the use of military power or military strength. So, therefore, it can be said that colonialism is a practice that leads to the subjugation, that leads to the dominance, that leads to the oppression of a weak country through military power or military might or military strength. And when colonization takes place, what happens is fundamental decisions are taken by the colonizers, with regard to politics, with regard to administration, with regard to culture. And all these decisions taken by the colonizers immensely affect the lives of the colonized people. For instance, I can speak in English, I can speak in Hindi and Bengali, but if I am not allowed to speak in any of these languages, rather some other language which is completely unknown to me is imposed upon me, and I'm compelled to speak in that language, then that would cause immense problem for me, because I am not accustomed and I don't even know the ABCD of that particular language. So these kinds of decisions, when taken by the colonizers in a colony, where we find that the colonized people, they are deprived of their identity, they are deprived of their culture in a way that the Westerners, the Europeans, they impose their own culture upon them, considering their culture, I mean the culture of the colonized people, to be inferior to them, and already being convinced themselves that their culture, the Western culture, is superior to the culture of the colonized people. So therefore, what they do, they enforce, their culture upon them and exert their dominance over the colony. So in this way we can see that colonization is not just exerting power over another country. It has other layers of meaning as well. For instance, like I said, that colonization affects one's identity. It affects one's culture, because some other culture is imposed upon the, or enforced, upon the colonized people, and that leads to immense problems, and it very bad, it very badly, in fact, it affects the lives of the colonized people. Therefore, this is how we can see how colonization functions. But as I said, that it has other aspects as well. Colonization is not just about territorial expansion. It's not just about exerting dominance over another country, taking it to be a weaker country, but it involves huge economic gains for the colonizer, and it is one of the main factors that interest, or that make the colonizers so much interested in setting up colonies. Because when colonization began, it was seen that if they are able to set up colonies, okay, then that would be a huge source of earning money. It would provide them with huge opportunities to earn wealth. Therefore, it is the most of course it is one of the factors that led to colonization, but then it is also the most important factor that led to colonialism, because the European nations who were were competing with each other, they embarked on colonizing or the other countries in order to strengthen the economy of their own country. So with this, we find that how colonialism started, and it also has several positive as well as negative effects. Now, if I take into account the positive effects, they are though very rare, but it is mostly the negative impacts, or the negative effects that are mostly dealt with by the post-colonial theorists or post-colonial critics, who try to look at, or who try to analyze or reinterpret critically the literary texts through the lens of post-colonial theory. When we talk about colonization, when we talk about colonialism, it should be remembered that the colonizers established colonies. They set up colonies in different parts of the world. But establishing the colonies was not just enough. They had to maintain those colonies. And the most important concern for them, for the colonizers, was that they had to, stay in power. So power plays, a very important role here. So once the colonizers established colonies, of course they came to power, they came to dominate the other country, the weaker country. But at the same time, the most important matter, or let's say the most important thing that concerned them, was how to stay in power. And here I would like to point out that the colonizers, they were interested in knowing the countries of the East, or they were interested in knowing, quote unquote, the Orient. But it was not out of any true concern, or it was not out of any genuine care and concern for them, or not out of any benevolent or generous purpose which made them or heightened their interest in knowing the Orient. In fact, they felt that in order to stay in power, they would require to construct the idea of the other, the word other is very, very integral to understanding the concept of colonialism, and like I said earlier as well, that this word would also help us understand what kind of relationship did the colonizer have with the colonized. So like I said, that the colonizers, of course, they were very much interested in knowing the Orient, in knowing the Eastern countries, but it was not out of any love or affection, or let's say it was not out of any concern for them. So they would instead, construct a knowledge. They would instead construct an idea about the other that would help them, to retain their power, or that would, help them to stay in power. And it is, from here, it is at this point that the idea or the knowledge of the Orient or the knowledge of the other comes into being. It is true, and it is a fact that the colonizers had some power, and it was because of this power that they became successful in setting up colonies. But then, staying in power, ensuring that they remain in power, became the major concern. And it is this concern that led them to construct the idea or the knowledge or a knowledge about the Orient, where, they would simply, create a kind of knowledge that would establish the political, let it be it a political, ethical, or racial, superiority of the European nations. So that is why, so we can see that this colonialism, was actually a project that involved vested interests of the European nations, and therefore they constructed the idea or a knowledge about the Orient, which is labeled as the other. And once they are able, to establish, once they are able to disseminate this knowledge, once they are able to disseminate this idea about the other, that they are racially, culturally, politically, socially inferior to them, they would be able to establish themselves as the enlightened race. A race who has the light of God, and therefore they took it as their mission, they took it as their duty to spread this light of knowledge among these among the Easterners, among the Eastern countries, who were regarded by them as inferior to their culture, or as inferior to the Westerners. And once they are able to, prove this fact, that the Easterners or the countries belonging to the eastern parts of the world, they are, inferior to them, and therefore they require someone or somebody, to enlighten them, to civilize them. It would become easier for the colonizers to justify their presence in the colonies. One of the factors that contributed to colonialism was religion. As far as the colonizers are concerned, or the Westerners are concerned, they felt that it was their duty, to spread their religion, to spread Christianity. Therefore, they began to send missionaries to these colonies, and endowing them or investing them with the duty to spread their religion. And by doing that, we found that how they were actually, enforcing the colonized people to give up their own culture, to give up their own religion, thereby exploiting them at the same time. Now the question that arises is, what made them think that what made the Westerners think that they should spread, they should take the responsibility on their shoulder to spread their religion. the Westerners actually, they felt that they represent the enlightened race. They are the civilized ones. They are the superior ones. Like they were already convinced about it, and they believed it from the bottom of their heart. So therefore, they felt that it was their duty to spread Christianity, to spread a religion through the Christian missionaries, and at the same time, enlighten this unenlightened race represented by the Orient or the Eastern countries. They considered them to be wild, they considered them to be savage, okay, and so they felt that now, being an enlightened race, okay, they should go and enlighten them. Now, here in this connection, I would like to explain how the idea of the other, or how this knowledge of the other was created. Now, in order to prove that the Westerners are superior in every way, to the Easterners, they require someone who they would prove to be inferior, who they would prove to be uncivilized, and so they began to consider, or let's say they looked down upon the Easterners, they looked down upon the Eastern countries or the Orient as the uncivilized, unenlightened race. And this is how they began to create this knowledge, create this idea about the other, and the intention or the intent being to establish their own supremacy, to establish their own superiority, to perpetuate their power more and more, and which would also, help them to stay in power simultaneously. So once they are able to do this, once they become successful in this mission, it would become easier for them to dominate the colonized people. It would become easier for them to colonize the Easterners, or let's say the colonized countries. So as far as the construction of the other is concerned, now how did they do it? How did the Westerners, construct this knowledge? What did they use in order to create this knowledge about the other, or the Orient? Because according to the Westerners, the Easterners, or the Eastern countries of the world, are the ones who represent the other. So they took resort to scientific discourse. They took resort to scientific knowledge, because science is a subject that is authentic, that appeals to, or that is taken to be authentic by all, that is believed to be authentic by all. And so there wouldn't be anyone, to challenge them. There wouldn't be anyone to challenge their beliefs. So they took resort to science in order to construct the idea, or in order to construct the knowledge of the other. For instance, scientific studies, or physical studies related to physiology, where all these studies were carried out in order to, identify, or in order to figure out if a person, has this size of the brain, okay, if the person has a smaller size of a brain or a larger size of a brain, then what kind of nature would that person have? So they began to use, scientific knowledge. For instance, I would like to refer to the Africans. Now, some of the Westerners, who went to Africa, and they found that the Africans have, big heads, okay, and so they took along with them scientists in order to carry out experiments, and so that they could find out, as to, like, why the Africans have, big heads, and they wanted to figure out what shape of the brain or what size of the brain they have. And then they use this scientific knowledge in order to prove that just because the Africans have big heads, the size of their heads are much bigger compared to the Westerners, therefore they are liable to be dominated. They are liable to be ordered, and this is what that makes them a race, okay, who do not have the capacity or who do not have the ability to be rulers. Rather, they are meant to be reigned, they are meant to be ruled. So why did they do that? Why did the Westerners make use of scientific knowledge? Because they knew that scientific knowledge would always be believable. Everyone would believe in it, therefore nobody would challenge these beliefs. So therefore they used scientific knowledge, they took resort to science in order to construct the knowledge of the Orient or the other. When we try to look at the relationship that exists between the colonizer and the colonized, it is also important to comprehend the concept of binary opposition. Now, what do I mean by binary opposition? The Orient and the Occident, the East and the West. So, the Orient is the exact opposite of the Occident, and the East is the exact opposite of the West. Now, like I already explained, that the colonizers needed, another race. They needed someone who they would label as inferior, who they would label as their exact opposite, because then that would help them, or that would enable them to stay in power and perpetuate their power and perpetuate their dominance over them. So we can say that the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized is one of mutual dependency. For example, if I talk about, the teacher and student relationship, if there were, if everybody were teachers, then there would be no teacher at all, because the importance of the position of a teacher depends on the existence of a student, because I cannot call myself a teacher if there is no student, and vice versa. A student cannot call himself or herself a student if there is no teacher. So we can see that it is a relationship of mutual dependency, where the existence of the teacher or the existence of the student is dependent, on the other. A teacher can call himself or herself a teacher only if he or she has students, to teach. Similarly, a student, can call himself or herself a student only if there is a teacher, because then that marks the difference or the opposition between the two. So, when we think about, or when we talk about the construction of the other is just the opposite, is just the opposite of the West. So, this binary relationship was something that was required by the Westerners in order to establish themselves as superior, in order to establish their culture as superior. So, they felt they needed an unenlightened, they needed an uncivilized race in order to prove themselves as the enlightened race, or in order to prove themselves as the civilized race. So, we can say that this binary opposition led to the construction of the other, because it is only through the presence of the other that the Westerners can prove their own supremacy, they can prove their own superiority. So, Now the question becomes the question that arose in our mind as to why did the West, need to construct the other, becomes clear to us. So the answer is to stay in power, to perpetuate their power, to exert their dominance over another country, proving them to be inferior, proving them to be unenlightened, proving them to be uncivilized. Therefore, at the end of the day, it would, help the Westerners justify their mission of colonialism. It would help them justify their presence in the colonies. So now it becomes clear to us that colonialism is not just about expanding the territory of a country or exerting dominance, but in order to do that, the Westerners had to construct the knowledge of the Orient, or the knowledge of the other, and that would help them to stay in power. So this knowledge of the other is always, the extreme opposite. And this is how the Westerners, they created not just a knowledge about the Orient, not just a knowledge about the Eastern countries, but they also created a knowledge about themselves, whereby the Westerners would be regarded as a superior race, they would be regarded as culturally superior, politically superior, and culturally superior, whereas the Easterners, or the Eastern countries, would be always held as uncivilized, unenlightened, and therefore highly, justify this mission of colonialism. I hope I have been able to explain in the simplest terms possible the concept of colonialism and its other important aspects as well. So if you really like the video and find it comprehensible, then do like it, share it. I'll see you soon in another video. Until then, bye-bye.